Computer. Hello, and welcome back to our new season of the Conscious Conversation series. I am delighted to have Dinah Jones with us today for the first episode of the autumn season. We're going to go all the way until December, and then we're going to take a short break and come back in January, and we'll see how things evolve along the way. I'm your host, Antonia. I'm the marketing manager of the Shiatsu Society, and I'm in charge I'm in charge of everything that you see going out online. And I'm also the person that is privileged enough to hold space for this wonderful familiar faces that we have in our Shiatsu community. And I'm really, really excited to dive deep into your journey, Dinah. So I would like to invite you to introduce yourself a little bit.
Okay, hello, lovely Antonia. Very nice to be here, and I feel very honored to join the list of brilliant teachers you've already had. So, I realized last week, I was leaving the Shiatsu Centre clinic where I've been working a long time. I was leaving with my teacher, Cliff. And we were laughing about how many times we'd, have you turned off the lights, blah, blah, blah. And I said, yeah, it's actually 35 years this year since I started practicing as a professional practitioner. And as I cycled home afterwards, I was thinking, actually, I'm now 70. So that's exactly half my life that I've been practicing in the same place, in the same room, a room full of angels. And I count my blessings. I was realizing as I look back, this year, I've had a difficult year for one reason and another. And one of the things that happened was that my brother died rather suddenly in Easter. And of course, when you lose any family member, it tends to trigger you to look at the whole of your life and childhood and memories and family. And then I was invited to talk on here. And you'll be glad to know that I am conscious for this conversation. And that also prompted me to look back at my personal Shiatsu history. So I've had a while of that being a focus for me.
Half of your life, that's impressive. I'm really sorry to hear about your brother, sending my condolences. And I really appreciate the fact that even using such a difficult moment to transform it into something that contributes to your healing, I think it's part of the Shiatsu ethos as well. So I'm really glad that you mentioned the way that you've processed what happened.
Yes, and actually, it's my Shiatsu training and my personal journey that has allowed me to find my brother was estranged from my family. It's a very tragic life story.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the only person in the family he was still in touch with, but very minimally and sporadically. But it's my Shiatsu perspective, I think, that has allowed me to find great healing from that process of his death and his moving on to the non-physical plane.
That's very beautifully defined.
Yeah. So thinking about my history, I'm one of 5 children. I'm the second, and I'm a farmer's daughter. So I was brought up with horses, ponies and horses, ducks, chickens, dogs, cats, loads of animals, and younger siblings. And I was thinking about this earlier and thinking that in a way, there's a kind of model there of selfless giving, and from my mum especially, looking after all the creatures and us. And in a way that was modeled to me by my mom. And I'm an English graduate, so I studied English at university in Norfolk, in Norwich, and of course, that qualifies you for nothing, apart from being a marvelous human, obviously. But there's no obvious career path. But when I first graduated in 76, I had a boyfriend who was half Canadian, and I pumped petrol and saved up money and flew to Vancouver. And I lived there for 3 months with him. And then we hitchhiked down the west coast of America and into Mexico. What a beautiful country. And I came back and still like, now what am I going to do with my life? Mm-hmm. And I did a bunch of just, little jobs, working on Cambridge market, selling books, looking after children, working secondhand clothes, ironing all day. But I'd got a taste for travel from that trip to Mexico. And so I thought, okay, I'll do a training in teaching English as a second language, as a foreign language. And that will get me to travel. And I went to London, and this is the late 70s. It's quite a time of political turmoil. Mm-hmm. And the sort of counterculture is bubbling away, the love and peace generation, and communes and co-ops and squatting. There was, very high unemployment, was high inflation, and lots of the 78, 79, I think, the winter of discontent, loads of strikes. Mm-hmm. And in 79, Margaret Thatcher came in to power, and began basically trying to dismantle all the gains that had been made by that love and peace generation. She took on the unions, and there's the miners' strike in the early 80s. There's the Brixton riots, the Toxteth riots. 81 was this, all those big riots, and the New Cross fire was a huge rise in racism, and the National Front fighting against, a bit like now.
I was wondering whether you could notice a lot of similarities.
Exactly. And I was pretty involved in a whole lot of political activity. Meanwhile, I'm bubbling away with my TEFL training. Mm-hmm. I lived in a squat in London. There was a lot of squatting going on, and communes and all of that. And I did this training, and I worked in a few language schools in Cambridge. And then I got a job in the Sudan. And I went for a year, employed by the Sudanese Ministry of Education. It's a very extraordinary spell. And I don't need to give you all the story, but basically I spent a day kind of fast tracking through my approaching death, because I got very ill and I didn't know what was going wrong. And then I realized, oh yes, of course, it must be the viral meningitis that my colleague had told me about recently. Mm-hmm. So I believed that I didn't just know, I knew that I would be dead by the night. And I'd been spending a lot of time alone, doing a lot of yoga, meditation, that kind of thing. And obviously I was probably running a huge temperature, but basically I fast tracked through the process of facing my own death. And huge grief and fear, but I ended up in a very serene place where I recognized that I would become particles of light against the sky. That was my phrase. And it was a life-changing experience for me.
How old were you then, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, it was 1981, so I was born in 54, so I can't work that out. 64, 74, I was late 20s.
Late 20s, okay.
Like that. And when I came back from Sudan, I thought, I don't really want to be a teacher. I had, reservations about the colonial nature of teaching English to, in this case, it was like classes of 80 Sudanese girls living in the northern part of Sudan in the desert. And it was irrelevant to them. It did not feel empowering or helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, no, I don't want to be a teacher. I'm not going to do that. And then I spent several years wondering what I did want to do. What shall I do when I grow up? So that's where I was doing all this kind of ironing and book selling and blah, blah, blah. Went traveling again, went back to Africa with my boyfriend, and we traveled for three months, I think. And then I wanted him to see Sudan. And we had friends in Kenya, so traveled up the Nile from Kenya through Sudan, through Egypt, back to England. And then I moved back to Norfolk for various reasons. And I'd still got old friends here from university days. One of my chums from UEA had opened a Whole Food shop, Norwich, and I'd got friends who ran a Whole Food stall on the market. So I could get work. I worked in both of those for several years. And that's how I met Cliff Andrews, because he also worked at Rainbow Whole Foods, because he'd worked in Brighton at Infinity Foods, where he'd started learning Shiatsu 81, I think. Okay. And then he was in Norfolk. So we met through Rainbow. We shared a house for a while, him and I and another friend. And I can still remember his room there. It had nothing in it but his saxophone stand, a futon, and a huge Masanaga meridian chart. And so I actually did an introductory workshop with him in 85. And really just to find out what it was our friend did, this weird thing. And I enjoyed it, but then I kind of forgot. And like I said, this was a time when I was quite involved with all this political activity. It was Rock Against Racism. We were going on demos, we were going on marches. And 81, I think Reagan came in, and he and Margaret Thatcher were a meeting of minds, and the Cold War was ramping up, and she welcomed his nuclear missiles over to the UK, and the cruise missiles were sighted at Greenham Common. And I went several times to Greenham, to the women's peace camp at Greenham. And I can't remember exactly, I think it's 85 or 6, I took part in a local anti-nuclear campaign. And it was called the Snowball Campaign. And we cut one strand of perimeter wire around a local nuclear base that housed nuclear material, and got ourselves arrested for criminal damage. And those of us who were in a position to did not pay the fine, and so got sent to prison. So I did that, and I spent 10 days in Holloway prison, which is the nearest women's prison to Norfolk. And it was another life-changing experience.
Sounds like it.
Yes. And luckily, because of Greenham, we didn't have too hard a time in prison. Most of the other women were mothers. So, there was a huge fear that there was going to be a nuclear holocaust. We didn't really think we'd survive this far. It's like now. But when I came out, I realized actually this trying to change the system to make the world a better place from the outside, not for me. It's so frustrating. You can make so little impression on the establishment. And around that time, I saw a poster for the next introductory Shiatsu thingy with Cliff. And I thought, oh yeah, I enjoyed that workshop. I'll give that another go. And that was 1987. And I went along, and that was really my aha moment. Okay, yes, this is it. This meets all my criteria. You know, it's helping others, it's selfless giving, but it's about internal transformation, one-to-one, to build a better place, rather than external fighting, demonstrating, marching, blah, blah. And really, I've never looked back. It, you know, Shiatsu training is a seismic shift, was for me, and I think for many, as I've observed over the years. You know, it's a transformative experience. And, you know, with all you need is a loving heart, a pair of hands, and a mat. So it's now we can see ecologically sustainable as well. And it benefits the giver as much as the receiver, which is pretty rare in most work, most professions. And it's a joy. One of your later questions, I remember on that list of questions, is what would you say to people starting out? And in fact, I said it to a few first years I was teaching last weekend. How lucky you are. How lucky you are to have found this. What a path it offers. Because there's all the personal development, of development aspect of it. There's a lifetime of learning, a whole rich tapestry of the Chinese medicine, the history. There's the potential for a spiritual path, and all the practices that go alongside Shiatsu, the Qigong, the meditation. There's your own physical well-being, and there's the ability to support others on their journey. So it felt like a blessing, and I was so lucky, Antonia. I can't believe how lucky I was. Even Cliff came to my house, I can remember, because he'd set up the Shiatsu College with his colleagues, Carola, Nicola. You've talked to both of those. Peace and Paul Lundberg were the other two founding teachers, and he was a powerhouse, Cliff. And in that group, he ran all the admin from Norwich as well. But all the classes initially were taught in London by that group of teachers. And they'd started in '86, so I joined in '87. I did 2 years with Cliff in Norwich, and then I had to go to London for my third year. And he came to my house to warn me, because they just put up the fees in London, and it was more expensive than Norwich anyway, and I was going to have to travel on the, 12 train journeys and blah, blah, blah. And I determined, although I'm a girl that saves up and doesn't go into debt, I save up and pay for things, but I thought, no, I'll borrow if I have to, because I really want to do this. And as it happens, I'd got an heirloom at a posh shop in London on sale or return, and every time I'd rung, it hadn't sold. And my boyfriend was going up to London. I said, oh, pick up those things for me. And I phoned to say he was coming. And they said, oh, actually, we've sold the Benares coat. It was, my grandfather lived in India. Gold, sequins, blah, blah, blah. And they said, is it okay if we give you a check for £500? Instead, so the fees had gone up to something like £300. It's like the old days now. So blessing. And once and in my third year, I traveled to London. So I started studying with Carola and Nicola and Michael Rose, who I know Carola mentioned as an unsung hero. He was another wondrous teacher of mine. And as soon as I graduated, Cliff, who'd set up the Shiatsu Centre clinic in Norwich, was very keen. So I was like his first graduate, and he was very keen that I should join him in the clinic. So I was able to build my practice very quickly, because it was a known centre. I got all his clients that he couldn't fit in. I covered for, you know, if he was away or whatever. And yes, so I built my practice quickly, and I was on the spot in Norwich. So when he then set up the postgraduate residential Shiatsu College trainings, I was the class assistant for Carola, for Nicola, for Paul, for Cliff, for several years. And also as part of my third year, I'd first met Pauline Sasaki. She came to teach for us. And as well as setting up the college and then the postgrad training, Cliff also invited a whole bunch of international teachers for the college. So Kishi and Kiko Matsumoto and Pauline. And because he was so busy, he handed over the running of those workshops to me. So then I was in charge of organizing those big Pauline Sasaki. They were annual and then biannual residential workshops. And I met a lot of international teachers as well on the postgrad as well, postgrad residentials. And I ended up getting invited first off to be part of the postgraduate Shiatsu College training team. I became an indispensable assistant and then one of the teaching team. And between the residentials and the Pauline workshops, I met a lot of international teachers. And I started being invited to teach myself all around Europe. So that's in the 90s and noughties, mainly. In 2003, Cliff asked me to take over the running of the Shiatsu College Norwich. And I did that till just the beginning of lockdown kind of time, or just into the beginning of COVID. So nearly 20 years I was running the Shiatsu College Norwich.
That's an incredibly rich path. And I'm wondering, because you've mentioned some key moments, the one that happened in Sudan, where you thought you were not going to survive, but actually life happened.
Yeah.
And then going to your first foundation.
Yeah.
Introduction to Shiatsu, and then having another awakening, another pivotal moment in your life when you ended up in prison for 10 days, and then going to the next foundation. So I'm wondering, what did you notice was different from the first introduction that you had to Shiatsu to the second one? What do you think has changed?
I think in between, it's very foreign. It was very foreign to me the first time. It's like all this crawling around on the floor, crawling on each other. And I was just doing it out of interest. I wasn't thinking about that as a life opportunity. Mm-hmm. I was just doing it because my friend was doing it and I wondered what it was he was doing. In fact, me and Richard both went just to see what Cliff did. And so it was like a vague interest, and I enjoyed it, but it's pretty strange, you know, first time I'd not had body work. Maybe I'd had osteopathy because I always had a lot of back issues. I'd fallen a lot from those horses and I'd been very strong. I was always carrying small children on my back and heavy lifting on the farm, you know, throwing bales and whatever. So I had some osteopathy for my back issues, but I wasn't, you know, I'd never had massage. I didn't know anything. So it felt just like, ooh, wacky stuff and quite good fun, but I thought no more about it. Mm-hmm. I was, like I said, quite preoccupied with all this political activism. And it didn't strike me as the vehicle that I was looking for. And, you know, during that time working in Whole Foods, thinking, what shall I do when I grow up? I did think about training in osteopathy, mm-hmm. but it was expensive and I had to go far away. And I thought about training as a social worker, but I'm very, I have a natural tendency to be very sympathetic, empathetic, and I could see that had potential pitfalls that I'd be too easily heartbroken. by others. So that didn't seem right. A few other things I thought of, but it was always wanting to do something to try and make the world better.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't until the beginning of the 87 that I thought, yes, this. And I think just I was a bit more familiar then, you know, I knew about crawling about on futons and I recognize, and because of that prison thing, realizing I can't fight from the outside, I recognize now I could make change from the inside one-to-one. And I kind of knew that, in fact, I was thinking about this morning, when I was first of all, working with horses, there's a lot of listening there. There's non-verbal communication. Mm-hmm. There's empathy, there's connection, there's rhythm, there's shared activity, if you like. Mm-hmm. And I thought, yeah, that's sort of informing in a way. And also I remember when I was a petrol pump attendant, it's quite a boring job. And to entertain myself, I made this game where I would do my best to assess each customer. This is the old days. You didn't help yourself. You had someone trot out and put the petrol in your car.
In some countries, they still do that.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And so my game was to try and assess this person as they drove in and think how best to get a smile from them, how best to get a moment, to get a connection. And yeah, it was entertaining me this morning thinking, yeah, that's kind of what you do with Shiatsu as well. You're assessing from the moment they speak to you, walk in the door, you're listening and thinking, how best can we connect? And in a way, that's what you're doing with a Shiatsu.
Is that what Shiatsu is for you? Do you see Shiatsu as a means of connecting with anyone you come in contact with, or does it represent something else to you?
It's definitely about connection. Mm-hmm. And it's about, in the practice space, mm-hmm. for me, it's about connecting with their strengths, okay. Connecting them to their higher self, to the infinite, that mm-hmm. space that I met in Sudan, the place of infinite love and light. And it's about listening to them with all senses, mm-hmm. quietening myself. It's their space. And my aim is for them to maximize their potential as this life form. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I heard myself last week talking to one of my clients and saying, or even this one, I suppose part of my philosophy is that we are spiritual beings here for a while, having a human experience. And I think earlier in life, I had a sense that we were physical beings, occasionally having a spiritual experience. So my perspective has shifted. And I think partly because of, maybe because of my experience in Sudan, that my relationship with death has been very strong throughout my practice and throughout my life.
Mm-hmm. In what way?
I've had a lot of death mm-hmm. Around me, family and dear friends and clients. Mm-hmm. And yes, one of your questions was about memorable moments. Yeah. And I'm thinking there's quite a few of those that were related to end of life experiences. Okay.
Would you like to tell me more about that?
Well, in fact, a very early example, someone I used to work with in the Whole Food shop was dying. And we'd made an appointment, and then she got a tumor on her spine and couldn't walk, so she was in the hospice and didn't ever come for shiatsu. But I spent quite a lot of time with her, and working her hands and her feet and talking to her. And I remember her saying that one of the things she really appreciated was my honesty, because people, tend to try and pretend you're not dying when you're dying. I wasn't doing that. But I can still remember her delight in just, my working her hand. It's like it was a miracle, or her feet. But also, one of your questions is about how, what would you like for shiatsu in the future? And I can remember showing her just how to stretch in her, she's catheterized and tubed and did it, but just showing her how to stretch in her bed. And later she was able to have a poo. She'd been terribly constipated, and it was like a miracle.
Just, it was a simple movement.
Yes, exactly. And just, an awareness of earth element meridians, blah, 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 and the points. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's what would be so great if for the future of shiatsu, if more of that shiatsu knowledge and understanding is in everyday life for people. I've got a neighbor who's suffering anxiety, and I'm saying to him, oh, we'll find some time soon and I'll show you a few things you can do to come back into your body, to slow the breathing, all those little things that we learn as part of our training could be so helpful in modern life when people are so stressed and anxious and depressed. Simple things.
I'm wondering, because whenever I hear about the beginning era of shiatsu, especially in the UK, I visualize a time where there was a lot of thirst for knowledge. People were going out in the world trying to change things, either, like you mentioned, doing it externally and then realizing that it's probably more suitable for you to do it internally first. Do you notice the difference between the world back then and the world now? And how do you think we can bridge some of that desire to learn and to bring more of shiatsu into the world?
That is a really hard question, isn't it? I mean, of course, there are huge differences. We didn't have social media. We didn't have this epidemic of 24/7 bombardment of news. We had bad news all over the place, but it was less intrusive.
More filtered?
Yes, exactly. And also, because the voice of the people, one of the wondrous things about the internet is the way it connects people, but one of the tragic things about it is the way that it separates people and the way it gives a mouthpiece for all the negativity and anger and fear of people. And huge changes. And how we come back to a more human, loving connection is, I think, a challenge that everybody's facing, really. And for me, I'm towards, I'm semi-retired. So for the young ones, I think just keep up what you can do, what you can do. It's one of our slogans in the 90s, 80s, 90s is like, think global, act local. Think bigger picture, act one-to-one. So any small thing that you do, the butterfly's wing, every action has a reaction. And best you can do, you do your best, don't you? So I don't have any magic wand.
I was hoping for a recipe, a 4 steps process that we can implement tomorrow. I'm clearly joking, but I do love your perspective, and I do love the slogan that you've mentioned, think global and act local, because at the end of the day, what is in our power is changing things one person at a time, starting with finding our center, grounding ourselves,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
then making a small, even a 1% change in the interaction with the people around us.
Exactly. And I think it was funny. I was cycling, as I have done for 35 years, up the long hill and into the city to the Shiatsu Centre. And I can remember when I was early days in practice and teaching, my affirmation as I cycle, I'm a good and successful Shiatsu practitioner and teacher. But
I'm going to add this on the list for recommendations for someone who's starting on this journey.
definitely, it really worked.
Mindful affirmations. Visualize where you want to get to
Yes,
and
exactly.
repeat it.
But now I notice the other week I started a different kind of, it's not really an affirmation, but with the aim in my inner aim to spread love and light where I can. And I found myself, as I cycled through the city, seeing people and wishing blessings on their soul. Blessings on us. All these challenged, fearful, angry, blessings on their soul. Please, God, send them love and light. That kind of feeling.
That's so wonderful. It definitely works with me right now, in case you were intending that as well. Um, and I reflect back at the memorable moment that you've mentioned. I can appreciate that that was incredibly difficult. I'm wondering whether in your career as a professional, when have you experienced difficult moments, and what were some of the tools that you used to overcome them?
Yes, I found that quite difficult as a question to consider, because I have been blessed. I have been blessed, and have been very lucky.
Maybe reflect in terms of what you've observed around the
Yes, but
situation.
a couple of things I did think of. One, for example, was having a client. I get up there into the treatment room with her, a new client, and she told me I killed my children. And it's a long story. She tried to kill herself. The kids died. She didn't. But in that moment, I was thinking, so what did I do? First of all, horror, grounding, centered, open heart. What? Hear her story. And then, as she rested and I came down, my treatment room is high in the building, and I came down to the office and Cliff, I need peer supervision. I need your peer supervision. I need to talk to somebody. How do I sit with it? What? So that was one difficult moment, for example. And that was my resource, was peer supervision. And it really helped. I mean, I was so lucky to be working alongside Cliff. And there have been times over the years when I've had other, my God, I remembered one.
Be my guest.
It was a woman who was interested in doing the Shiatsu training. This is when I'm running the college. And she sounded fine on the phone, and we arranged for her to come in and have a chat so I could tell her about it. And I was on my own in the center, and she came in and she seemed like, and I remember looking her up and thinking, oh, she worked at the university, scientist, research person or something. You know, she was a functional human. But in the office, alone with her, she started talking in tongues. Like,
okay.
And I can remember then thinking, whoop, okay. Again, horror, center. I wished I'd had a buzzer under the counter, you know, like, help. Because when someone's properly disturbed, you just don't know, do you, what's going to happen? I managed to get her out of the building. It was fine. And we agreed initially, really for me to get her out, that she'd come along and see how she got on. But then I got peer supervision and colleagues, and then I mailed her and said, actually, she explained a bit about how this happens to her, this talking in tongues thing. And I explained about having a duty of care to the other students and and I didn't think it would be appropriate. And she was fine about it. Perhaps a little entertaining challenge. Then there was one really awful. There was a time, I mean, on and off over the many years, I've been a part of the Shiatsu Society. And I was an editor of the Shiatsu Society newsletter, it was, and then the Shiatsu Society News. And then here's my, I think I showed you this before. Here's my very first.
I am so glad you brought it. So in case you're listening to the conversation, you do have to have a look at the screen because we have a very valuable edition of the Shiatsu Society News, the spring issue from 1997.
Yep.
I was 5 years old at that time.
Well, I was old. So I was 43, yeah. And there was a rotten old conflict going on in the Shiatsu Society. There were some men, I'm saying that with a certain weight, some rather power-hungry men who had various ideas of, the society was a lot bigger then, there were 2,000 something members, and wanted it to be more of a business enterprise. And they brought in some company that they wanted to run various aspects of it. And in effect, what was happening was they wanted control of the journal. And we editors, who at that time included Bill Palmer, and Daverick Leggett, can't remember the other one at that time. Basically, we wanted to maintain editorial independence. And came an AGM, a lot of people in the room. And because it was my turn in the cycle, I was the person that had to stand up and speak about why we felt it was important to maintain editorial independence. And sitting across from me was one of these, he was a big chap and he was determined to get the power. And that was a really challenging moment. And I was nervous, you know, my mouth was dry, my hands were sweaty. But I was able to speak fluently. And afterwards, everyone came up saying, I don't know how you did that, it was amazing, and we won, basically, we kept our editorial independence. And the resource that I used to help me with that was what's called writing morning pages. I don't know.
I'm familiar with them, yes.
Familiar with that technique from the Julia Cameron book, The Artist's Way, which was in vogue at that time. Lots of people were doing The Artist's Way about clearing creative blocks and stuff. And I did a bit of it. I didn't do the whole course, I don't think. I wrote morning pages, and I still do whenever I've got troubles in my life. I still find it really valuable. And I seriously ascribe my ability to stand centered in that meeting and speak fluently to that practice of writing morning pages, which I still give as a recommendation to troubled clients these days. It's so useful just to get it down on paper, throw it away.
You just separate everything from the mind and you see it in front of you. I hear that the peer-to-peer support was incredibly important, especially in the challenging moment when you had to deal with vulnerable type of clients or clients that were not necessarily in your area of expertise or in the expertise of a shiatsu practitioner. And I hear that you refer them to a different type of specialist, which is wonderful. I also hear about, this is a constant pattern that I've noticed you saying, back to my heart, open heart. Back to my heart, open heart.
Yeah.
I love that. And thank you for the recommendation for the morning pages. Journaling is part of my self-care routine on a daily basis.
So useful. And it is, my sister's oldest boy took his own life a few years ago. And yes, a part of my life story of tragedies and deaths. But it's been great to be able to support her. And actually, that's something I taught her. But just anxious clients with troubled minds, you know, just getting it down on paper, so helpful.
It's a useful resource. You've mentioned the Shiatsu Society Journal. I would like us to focus a little bit on the Shiatsu Society, your contribution, and maybe you can tell me a little bit more about the world of Shiatsu Society before the pandemic. What was happening?
Golly, well, it's been through many, many changes. I mean, I joined in when I first started my training, 87. And it was just a little newsletter, and it was really very internal. It was telling us all about the courses that were available, and news from the directors and And over the years, there have been so many changes, I can't even think of them. And you know, it's gone from a tiny society to like a family, to a big society with different, you know, the people that are involved in running it have tended to flavor it over the years. And I think, well, we were very lucky in recent years to have Elaine come back in with all her history, and Annie with all her passion and history, and really shift the atmosphere, if you like, because like I said, there have been times where it's been quite conflictual. There have been power struggles, there have been ineffectual chairs, or more effectual ones, more effective ones. And I feel like at the moment, the society is quite small now, but the vibe is great. And you've played a part in that, Antonio.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And things are evolving even more.
And better, there's a better atmosphere. I mean, the old days, the journal often would have letters, and sometimes they were just, you know, letters of interest or whatever, but there were also sometimes conflict going on. I didn't like this article because, but you know, there was quite a lot of that.
It's good to hear that people were still vocal, even though they were contradicting opinions. The fact that you have an active community that is vocal about the things that matter, it's really important, and it speaks on the ethos of Shiatsu. I have a personal curiosity. Which of the eras of the Shiatsu Society was your personal favorite? And what did you love most about it?
Well, really the journal. I love the journal. It's always been, I mean, we shifted it to a journal. And in fact, that's relatively recently, since all the e-newses started happening, which had all the information, so that we didn't have to have them in the journal. So we were able to focus more on articles and longer articles. And because I'm an English grad and I'm a pedant, no, I have a great attention for detail. I love editing, and it's been a delight being a Shiatsu Society Journal editor for all this time, because I've got to connect again with all those wonderful people who contribute, different teachers, because I've got a wide circle, because I've been around a long time and I've met a lot of people. It's meant that and the nature of editing is that you read in depth, you know, over and over, checking this, checking that. And actually, from it, I've ended up helping to edit several books. In fact, Nick Pole put me on, friend and colleague. He's another person you should have on here. he put me in touch with Philippe van den Abiel, who lives in Japan and is Belgian, and I helped him. We call it polishing the English translation of his book, and I've been helping him ever since with other bits of text and writing and And I helped Joyce Vlaarkamp, who's Dutch, and a colleague of Philippe and another friend of Nick's, with her book, Softening Our Gaze.
You have such an impressive network. Throughout our conversation, you have such an impressive network. Throughout our conversation, I was observing how you're weaving in different elements, and the fact that I see you at the core of this network. I find that incredibly impressive.
And yes, I've also worked with Cindy Engel, who was my student or our student at Shiatsu College Norwich a really long time ago. It's quite scary to teach her because she's so clever. I was teaching physiology and she's like the biologist. But she wrote a book a little while back, a really fantastic book, which isn't a Shiatsu book, but it's, I think all Shiatsu practitioners should read it. It's on somatic empathy.
Somatic empathy.
That's what it's called. Suddenly forgotten what it's called. It'll come back to me.
No worries, we can leave it in the show notes.
Yes, no, and I helped her with that. In fact, my partner and I both helped her with formulating it, and I did more editing for her, polishing the English. And then just now, Mike Mandel has written or has edited and contributed to a shared book on the essence of Shiatsu. And again, I've done polishing the English translation of that book.
How wonderful.
It's by Philippe. And yeah, it's a joy to me. And it's, you know, with the Shiatsu Society, I always felt, I wanted to support it, but I could never quite bring myself to take on being a director. And also because I was very busy, I did loads of international teaching. I got, again, I was thinking of memorable moments, wonderful workshops in Switzerland, looking out the window at them surfing on the river in Bern and cycling through the park with the red squirrels, to my workshops in Munster in Germany, and swimming in the pool in the residential centre in Italy with Pauline Sasaki. All those, lots of lovely.
How wonderful. Why do you think someone should join the Shiatsu Society today? And where do you think things are heading?
I think everyone who's interested in Shiatsu should join the society, because it's the hub of our community. It's our professional association. It holds our code of conduct and ethics. It supports the new diploma. Some mixed feelings about the diploma. The level 4 diploma. I know the dream is that getting it into the national qualifications framework is the way to raise the profile of Shiatsu. And I'm not sure that it is, but we'll see. It's there now. Just because of the being tied down in some sense into the process of, meeting all the learning outcomes and criteria, assessment criteria, all of that. It's a bit arduous. But it needn't take away from the spirit of sharing. I mean, that's one of the joys of teaching Shiatsu. I always think it's a bit like giving Shiatsu, but also teaching Shiatsu it's a bit like throwing a pebble in a pond and the ripples spread out. And, every client that you touch, you can bring more love and light into their life, we hope. But also every student whose life is transformed by the training. And it brings tears to my eyes when you see how people change and are empowered, and every person that they touch, it spreads out. It's a joy. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten your question.
You've already given me the answer. And it makes me want to go back to the beginning of our conversation and maybe to finish up on the same note. Whether it's teaching shiatsu, giving or receiving shiatsu, it's a matter of changing the world one person at a time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I find that wonderful. Dinah, thank you very much for your time. I'm conscious of your time. I could stay here and chat for ages. I really appreciate. I think we've covered everything, unless there's something that you feel you would still like to share, and I haven't given you the opportunity. Please be my guest.
I can't think of anything else. Like I said, I could talk all day, but I send love and light to you and anyone who's watching this.
Duly received. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and thanks to all of you that are listening and watching the recording. Please help us out by subscribing, liking, leaving comments, asking questions, and staying in touch with the Shiatsu Society. Thank you very much.
Go. Bye-bye.
Bye. Let me just stop the recording.